But anyways, guys, welcome to the top 10 list of the best spell cards of all time. Now, before we jump into the list, let's go ahead and go over a bunch of really great spell cards that didn't quite make it on the list, but they're still very, very good. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into the discussion of talking about other really great cards that, again, just didn't make it on the list because they're not as broken as some of the cards that we're going to be talking about. But anyways, first off, it's a really simple card, but it is one of the best spell cards of all time. So many archetypes have, you can search out one ice barrier, you can search out one specific thing to an archetype, but Reinforcement of the Army searches out 6 samurais, you can search out other archetypes that come out into the future. Reinforcement Army is still honestly one of the best cards. I mean, dragons don't have a card that summons, instantly, any, searchable dragon. I know we have some cards that, we have Dragon's Ravine, but there's really not a card that just lets you just straight up just add one straight from the deck to the hand. And, Rhoda will still always be a really good card, even looking into the future. Now, you can see everyone typing in the middle. We are doing this live because I just saw so many good cards that you guys mentioned. I figured, go ahead and do it live. But you can feel free to comment if you felt like we missed out on anything. Next up, Butterfly Dagger Elma. Now, this card opened up a lot of different loops, FTKs to put on Magical Library to just draw infinitely. It doesn't really make the top 10 list simply because it's just not viable in today's meta. Like, to get out Gearfried the Iron Knight and be playing Exodia and being able to have Royal Magical Library, it's very unrealistic to do that turn 1. Next up, Defissure, just an overall great card. It can automatically win games, but it's just not as broken as, again, most of the top 10 stuff. I'm not going to mention that every single time. I'm just going to mention, some just good cards. E-Tele, simple in a lot of Synchro decks. Good in a lot of very archetype-specific decks, specifically like the Super Quantums. Very good as well in that. Then we have Pantheism, a newer card, but just an excellent card just to be able to, get that draw power. Plus, in addition to that, you get to add extra draw power when you banish it. Good card. Monarch Storm 4th, really great card. Really easy out to a lot of archetypes, but, again, it's just not powerful enough. Reasoning, this was specifically super good in Infernoids. Also, there was something called Diamond Dude Turbo, which made this card with Monster Gate. It was just absolutely crazy. As far as Pendulum stuff went, we do have Sky Iris and Pendulum Call, just excellent, great little cards. Then we have Allure of Darkness. Again, just the simple, draw power kind of consistency things with those cards. Now we're jumping into more of, the cards that I think a lot of you guys definitely wanted on this list, but again, they just didn't quite make it. So, Pot of Desires, it's a new card. It's been topping in OCG like crazy, but as far as right now, I'm still looking forward to, what it does in the TCG and, what it's going to be used in the future. I know a lot of FTK decks, OTK decks will definitely be playing this card. Excellent simple card, just being able to draw 2. Not as good as our OG Pot of Greed, but it's still definitely a really, really strong card. Next up, a newer card, Cosmo Town. This card does it all. It lets you cycle that have consistency. It lets you search out another card, that is already banished. And then on top of that, it has that ability to, once it gets destroyed, you get to add a Cosmo card from your deck to your hand. So, very, very good stuff indeed. I like how literally the chat is capless only. Great discussion here we have, guys. And then next up, Shaddoll Fusion is also just another one of those great cards. When it came out, people were like, whoa, you get a fusion from the deck. Absolutely great card indeed. It just, Shaddolls aren't really a thing anymore. But yeah, excellent card. Definitely deserved a spot, to mention on the top 10, but didn't quite make it to the top 10. Book of Moon negates effects, gets rid of a monster essentially by, flipping it face down. You can attack over it. Really simple card, and it still sees a lot of play even in OCG. Same thing with Chalice, it's the same thing essentially, but Book of Moon, it does flip it face down, so it lets you kind of run over the monster much more easier than Chalice does. Next up, Mystical Space Typhoon. Really simple card, but it's honestly, I was really considering putting this on the top 10 alone, simply because it's one of the best things to get rid of, just a problematic card, especially when you go into game 2 and 3. Mystical Space Typhoon has been there time after time to save so many people's, decks from just instantly losing to a Rivalry of Warlords or something like Gozen match or a Light Imprisoning Mirror, Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. So many decks, lose when they don't have MST because their opponent flips up one card. Soul Charge, absolutely crazy. When it came out, people were like, what the heck, Konami, what you doing? This card's crazy. But even now, a lot of decks just don't even play it. Again, it had its phase. Power creep is real in the game. But once you guys see the top 10, you guys will understand, how good the top 10 is. Rekindling, another similar to Soul Charge. Match Driver, a lot of FTKs, OTKs. Chicken Game, another great card just to have consistency, but it's banned in the TCG here. Brilliant Fusion opened up a lot of different ways to actually finish off your opponent and go for extensive combos in a lot of different decks. Next up, Brain Control, excellent card. Same thing with Change Your Heart. But once you guys again see the top 10, you guys will see how broken the cards are. Most of the cards in the top 10 are like, they're win conditions almost on their own. But Card Destruction, it's actually still legal in the OCG. It's very specific to certain decks, but it's still overall a really great card. Card of Safe Return. Now originally I wanted to put this on the top 10, but again, once you get to the top 10, you'll see how crazy the cards are. Super Poly, excellent card, but it was only relevant for a short period of time, specifically when Shadalls were a thing. Regeki, it's a great card, but again, overshadowed, and a lot of the cards that we'll be talking about just are going to show you that they're viable back in the day, plus they're viable right now, and even in the future, they'll definitely still be good. But Regeki just lost a lot of its power. Metamorphosis, it's a great card, just to, just it opened up the door for a lot of different things to be played that normally wouldn't see any play. And next, for the 3 cards that we're going to be talking about, Hardy's Feather Duster, Giant Terrain, and Heavy Storm. These are all great cards, but again, Harvey's Feather Duster legal in the OCG, and it's just not as viable anymore. These cards, they had their prime for quite some time, but when you look at some of the other cards that are quick plays like Twin Twister and stuff like that, or even looking at that new Galaxy Cyclone, like there's a lot of cards that just get extra utility that these cards just don't offer. Now, Giant Terrain does, however, offer a lot more stuff now. I would say Giant Terrain almost outclasses some of these cards simply because of pendulums. You can, go for your pendulum scale, maybe go ahead and summon them, and then back to your hand, redo some type of, shenanigans. Like, a real quick example would be like Scout. You pay 8, go ahead, search a card, complete scale, and then you can go ahead, turn 8, bounce back Scout. You could technically go double Scout, search out double cards. That is, if Scout was at 2. Or I'm sure in the future we'll get another pendulum card that searches out a card instantly. You actually double those, your pendulum scale's messed up, but you get those double searches, Giant Terrain, put them back, search double again, and that's really where Giant Terrain would shine. So Giant Terrain has a little bit more potential than a card like, say, Heavy Storm does, looking to the future of the game. Next up, Confiscation. Really great card, but it's outclassed by a card called Forceful Sentry, which is actually on the top 10. Next up, Reborn. Simple card. Great card, just self-explanatory. It opens up a lot of doors to certain things. But next up, Card of Demise. Definitely top spot. I mean, you guys have seen it in Cleese and so many different decks. Cosmos. There's so many decks that run this card, and it is dirty. It really is. Mirage of Nightmare, specifically great in things like Dark Worlds, but overall, it's a really broken card. And the next up, Final Countdown. This deck has topped so many times, and it's been a deck that could top for a relatively budget player. There are so many different decks that cost hundreds of dollars, but when Final Countdown was a thing with, like, Battle Faders, with Scarecrow, like, a lot of these cards were relatively cheap, so it was a deck that a lot of people played, and it won a lot of tournaments. Next up, one of my favorite cards, actually, Pot of Avarice. Really great card indeed, but again, it's just not as good as some of the other stuff we're talking about, but, maybe it'll come back one day. For now, it is banned. I mean, it lets you recycle some of your stuff, but then it lets you re-add 2 cards, so maybe you can go off by drawing some of the cards that you put back. Change of Heart, kind of like Brain Control. It's very, very good card. Although this card definitely outclasses Brain Control, because Brain Control you have to pay 8, pay 8, Scout. Next up, Super Rejuvenation. This card, it's actually legal in the OCG at 3, and no one plays it. It was really broken in Dragon Rulers. That's really essentially what got it banned in the first place. Next up, Delinquent Duel. Fantastic card. But the problem with this, it doesn't let you see your opponent's hand, and it is random. Whereas the card that is on the top 10 list that outclasses this, the Forceful Sentry, is just overall better. Next up, Last Will. Just an excellent little card, but it does make it so your opponent had to have gotten rid of your things, and this day and age, that is technically a little bit slower. And then lastly, but not least, before getting into the top 10, Instant Fusion. Obviously with Norden, with so many decks FTKing with Norden, it was definitely a noteworthy mention, but again, it didn't make it onto the top 10. But anyways, finally we got all of the cards that are really great that I wanted to mention that were good contenders to be on the top 10, but they didn't quite make it. Let's go ahead and jump finally into the top 10 spell cards of all time. So let's go ahead and jump in with number 10, Wavering Eyes. Absolutely crazy card in Pendulums. When you do Mirror Match and you're able to get that 4th effect where you can add 1 Wavering Eyes, where you get to do all of those effects potentially, it's just absolutely crazy, where you like burn and then you can add 1 and then you can banish a card and add. it just becomes crazy. This card made Mirror Match Pendulum so crazy because, like, someone would save their Wavering Eyes, but then you had to be like, oh, I need another Wavering Eyes because maybe he duality into a Wavering Eyes. You know, you have to watch out for some of that stuff. This definitely deserves a spot because it's one of the craziest cards to be introduced into the game with a new mechanic that it was like an instantly blowout. Like, if you got the, you know, the 4 effect, you basically had game. Next up, the card I think all of you guys that played against Six Samurais know about, and you've gotten sacked, don't lie. Everyone's gotten sacked by someone opening up Gateway. Even when this card was at 1 and Six Samurais weren't even meta, Gateway still won games. This card is crazy that you're just able to just add counters. Okay, special summon keys on, add more counters for days. This card definitely deserves a spot on the top 10. It's just a card that it won games, and it's banned for that reason. It literally steals games away. If you open up Gateway and playing Samurais, it's very difficult to lose because it's so free. Like, it's absolutely crazy. And what's even crazier with this is if your opponent is also playing Six Samurais, you also get those counters. And yeah, and you can remove Bushido counters from your side of the field to activate these effects. It's just the amount of counters that you add and remove is just like you keep on doing it. And I could say so many things about how much I dislike it when my opponent has this. But when I have this card, it's awesome. Next up at number 7, we have Dimension Fusion. So you pay 2k, both players special summon as many of their removed from play monsters as possible. Usually what that means is I special summon a bunch of monsters because I went off, I banished myself, then I activate it, and then I'm going to win. There's no, like, you can't, enter your battle phase, or you can't synchro summon except for, like, Mystical Beast, or you have to synchro summon for machines or something. There's really no downsides to this card. This card in the future would still be super, super good, especially when there's so many things that like to banish now. This card, it's just crazy good. I mean, yeah, I know both players summon it, but for the most part, you guys know that, yeah. It's like when you use Heavy Storm, usually it's when you're going to destroy all of your opponents. You might destroy one of your own, but you're getting more value out of it than your opponent would. Next up at number 6, we have Cold Wave. This card won games on its own. Especially looking into the future of the game, if you're playing against a Pendulum deck, oh, I activate Cold Wave, and then I summon a bunch of monsters. You know, you can play Cosmos, you can play a lot of different decks, and you might not need spells in that deck, so you go ahead and Cold Wave them, and then if they're playing a Pendulum-based deck, they pretty much don't have very many options, especially because, you know, they're going to be playing so many cards that search out and deck things, so all of that kind of stuff will get completely shut down by Cold Wave, and especially since you can set all your stuff. So, you know, you can, well, it's you and your opponent cannot set any spell and traps, but it's just like the Cold Wave plus like Oppression was like also a really dirty thing. It's just, I remember back when X-Sabers were a thing, I believe Royal Oppression was still a thing in that format, and I just remember Cold Wave Cat was like the super like boss play. Where you would go ahead and Cold Wave someone, and then you would summon Rescue Cat, and that pretty much you lost the game. But yeah, Cold Wave would be super good even in the future of the game. Next up at number, what is this, number 6 or 5? I lost track of that. I believe actually, hold on, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this would be at number 6 actually. My bad on that. But anyways, Forceful Sentry is the next card. You look at your opponent's hand, you select one of those cards, and you return it to the deck, and then you shuffle the deck. So at this point, like, it outclasses some of the other cards that we talked about that are still very good. Like Confiscation, it sends it to the graveyard. This puts it back into the deck. So that's really, really good. Yes, you can argue in some circumstances Confiscation could be better, but for the most part, I find Forceful Sentry to be better simply because it just makes it so it returns it to the deck. Like if they have all monsters, like obviously a lot of decks have effects in the graveyard, or it's better for them essentially to, you know, go through that. And Forceful Sentry lets you see your opponent's hand, and Confiscation does have that 1,000 life point cost. And we're looking at a format where life points don't matter as much, but when you look at cards like Solemn Strike and Warning, where you have to pay life points, it can become something that you might have to consider later in the game. But yeah, Forceful Sentry, just being able to see what your opponent is playing before the game even starts, it's just way, 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 way better. Like if you're going first and you activate Forceful Sentry, you can set up and you can change your place out to cater towards that deck. And then next up at number 5, we have Graceful Charity. Draw 3 cards, this card. Literally like one sentence right there. Very, very good card. So many different decks can utilize this. It lets you just go through your cards way, way, way faster than really any card in the game. But yeah, overall it's really good in like Dark Worlds and stuff like that, but just one of the best draw powers that's super generic in the game. Now at number 4 we have Painful Choice. So you select 5 cards, you reveal them to your opponent, and your opponent lets you add one of them, and then you just discard the rest of the cards. Really insane card in so many decks. For example, Light Sword, I could select, 5 different Light Sword monsters, and I could select multiple wolves. So at that point, I could just summon up to 2 wolves, because they're going to give you that wolf to your hand. But there's so many different decks that require, like, you need one of these in the grave, and like this card just lets you set up perfectly. You can Mercuria, like, there's just way too many FTKs, OTKs, and on top of that, it's good even in the future in the game when we require certain things in the graveyard to be viable, like Quantums, and there's just so many different things that just make this card super, super, super strong. And then next up, we have Future Fusion at number 3. So Future Fusion, it opens up so many FTKs and OTKs simply by itself. Even looking into the future of this game, when we have other archetypes, Future Fusion, super, super strong card. In Dragons, it was literally a just game-breaking card. Do we have 11? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, we have 10. That was definitely number 3. So you get they're trolling in chat. Welcome to being a Twitch streamer. But yeah, Future Fusion definitely deserves a spot here on the top 10. And then at number 2, Pot of Greed. One of the most simple cards. Draw 2 cards. Looking in the future of this game, there's not a format where Pot of Greed would be a bad card at all. But it's a simple fact. I don't think we really need to talk much about Pot of Greed. But lastly and not least, the best spell card that's ever came out in the game. And I don't think anyone will argue with me on this. You guys can talk about all these other cards on the top 9, but the number 1 spot has to be Spellbook of Judgment. The most broken card inherently designed ever made in the game. Hands down has to go to this card. So Spellbook of Judgment. During the end phase of this turn, this card is activated. Add Spellbook spell cards from your deck to your hand, except for Spellbook of Judgment, up to the number of spell cards activated after this card's activations, after this card's resolution. And then you can special summon a spellcaster type monster whose level is equal or to the amount of number of cards added to your hand by this effect. You can only activate 1 per turn. Who cares that you can't add another copy? You can add a copy of this card by using this card to just search out spellbook cards. And it was a quick play. And it could special summon a card that said your opponent couldn't play, and then you got to re-add everything. Hands down, the crazy... It literally made spellbooks. They kept on supporting spellbooks until they got this card. They weren't really the best deck. And yeah, like I said, hands down, it has to go to this card. It just opened up so many crazy plays. It was any spell cards that you activate. People playing Toon Table. Content is just literally searching out and deck thinning to get those other cards. So just go for Spellbook of Judgment, summon a card that said, my opponent could not YuGiOh, and then on top of that, you were able to re-add all the cards, set the Spellbooks of Fates, and then you were able to have as many cards as you wanted. It was just an absolute blowout, and this is what made Spellbooks, and I'm glad it's banned. Hopefully this card will never come back. But anyways, guys, that is our top 10 list that we created together live on the stream. And if any of you guys feel like we missed out on any cards, I would love to hear them down below in that comment section. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you guys give that like button a titty slap and tell me your top 10 list. Or if you guys want to just talk about cards in general, we'll definitely be doing traps and other crazy things in the future. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'm signing out.